Miguel Hernandez had worked the land near Cholula for 47 years. His family had inherited 12 acres of rich volcanic soil, the same earth their ancestors had cultivated for generations. The recent drought had forced his hand. He needed to dig an irrigation canal to save his corn crop from withering entirely. What he didn't know was that beneath the packed earth and roots lay something that would transform not just his farm, but the understanding of pre-Columbian life in Puebla. On a Tuesday morning in late September, as Miguel's hired crew broke through a particularly stubborn layer of clay with picks and shovels, one worker's blade struck something solid. Not a stone, something older. The team cleared away the dirt carefully, revealing a wall painted in deep crimsons, ochres, and blacks. Figures emerged from centuries of darkness, glyphs, warriors, astronomical symbols, all rendered in the unmistakable style of the classic Maya period. Miguel stood motionless, his weathered hands trembling. He had unearthed a secret the earth had kept since approximately 800 AD. The mural stretched across what appeared to be a sealed chamber, a ritual space that had been deliberately buried. But questions multiplied with each revelation. What else lay hidden? Why had the Maya sealed this room? And who else would soon learn of this discovery? Within days, the story spread through Puebla's small archaeological circles and beyond. Miguel found himself caught between conflicting desires. Preserve the mural and satisfy his curiosity about what lay beneath, or cover it again and continue his life as before. He chose to uncover the truth, a decision that would test his courage, his family's unity, and his understanding of what true treasure meant. Chapter 1. The Strike. The morning light filtered through the dust cloud that hung over Miguel's field like smoke from a distant fire. He stood at the edge of the excavation, watching his crew work with the methodical rhythm of men who had been digging since dawn. The canal stretched nearly 40 meters already, a thin scar across his property that would funnel water from the seasonal spring higher up the slope. Miguel wiped sweat from his brow with a handkerchief worn thin by decades of use. At 63, he moved slower than he once had, but his eyes remained sharp. He surveyed the work with the pride of a man who knew every meter of his land intimately. The volcanic soil here was rich and dark, mixed with the reddish clay that made Puebla's earth distinctive. Beneath everything lay layers of history, ash from Popocatépetl's eruptions, sediment from ancient lakes, fragments of civilizations that had risen and vanished. "Patron!" The shout came from the deepest part of the canal where young Javier was working. "There's something here." Miguel moved toward the voice, his boots slipping slightly in the loose earth. The other workers had already stopped, leaning on their tools, curious. Javier stood waist-deep in the trench, his pickaxe raised. In front of him, the earth had been cleared away to reveal a flat surface, unusually flat and deliberately constructed. "Don't strike it again," Miguel commanded, dropping to his knees at the canal's edge. "Carefully now. Use the brush." For the next 2 hours, they worked with the delicacy usually reserved for handling newborn animals. A soft brush, then cloth, then hands, to gently clear away the accumulated earth of 14 centuries. Colors began to emerge, first a dull red, then a deeper crimson. Outlines materialized. A figure took shape, then another. By noon, they had exposed a section of wall perhaps 3 meters wide and 2 meters high. The paint, though faded, was unmistakable. The style was ancient. The symbols were deliberate. The craftsmanship was extraordinary. Miguel stood back, his breathing shallow. He recognized what he was seeing because he had visited Chichen Itza once, years ago, and had seen murals in museums in Mexico City. This was pre-Columbian art. This was Maya. This was impossible and absolutely real. "Everyone step back," he said quietly. "Nobody touches this until we understand what we've found." That evening, Miguel made a phone call to the regional museum in Puebla City. He spoke to Dr. Elena Morales, an archaeologist he had met years before at a community event. His voice was steady as he explained what had happened, but inside, something fundamental had shifted. His simple farm had become a portal to the past. Dr. Morales arrived the next morning with a team. Within hours, the section they had exposed had been documented, photographed, and carefully covered with protective sheets. The work on the canal ceased. Official vehicles began appearing on the dirt road leading to his property. News traveled fast. By evening, a local journalist had arrived. By the next day, regional news outlets were running stories. By the end of the week, visitors had begun appearing at the fence: archaeologists, history enthusiasts, curious locals, and people whose intentions were far less transparent. Miguel realized he had opened more than just a canal. He had opened a door to complications he had never imagined. Chapter 2. Beneath the Surface. The first complication arrived in the form of Miguel's son, Roberto, who drove up from Puebla City on a Saturday morning with his wife, Carmen. Roberto worked in real estate development, and his mind immediately calculated percentages and possibilities. "Father," he said, standing at the edge of the now secured excavation site, "do you understand what this means? The property value alone." "It means we've found something historically significant," Miguel interrupted, though not unkindly. "That's what it means. It means that if we handle this correctly, we could negotiate with the government, with universities, with collectors. This could secure our future." Carmen placed a hand on her husband's arm, a silent restraint. She had learned long ago that Roberto's ambition sometimes outpaced his wisdom, especially when family matters intersected with money. Dr. Morales was at the site that afternoon with a smaller team, including her graduate assistant, a young woman named Sophia who specialized in Maya epigraphy. They had brought equipment for controlled excavation: screens, measuring tools, documentation systems. This was archaeology done properly, which meant it was archaeology done slowly. "The mural itself is remarkable," Dr. Morales explained to Miguel as they stood before the exposed section. "But what's more remarkable is the chamber. This wasn't just decoration on the side of a structure. This was a sealed room, deliberately covered. That means whatever is inside was meant to be preserved." "Preserved for whom?" Miguel asked. "That's what we need to discover. The glyphs are partially readable, but the angle and weathering make it difficult. Sophia is working on the translation now. What we can tell you is that this appears to be from the late Classic period, possibly the 8th or 9th century. That's the period when many Maya cities were experiencing significant stress before the collapse of their civilization." Over the following week, Dr. Morales' team carefully widened the excavation. What emerged was the outline of a rectangular chamber carved deliberately into the earth and reinforced with stone. The entrance had been sealed with clay and rocks nearly 1,500 years ago. The mural covered the interior wall that faced the entrance, a wall that had been painted and then deliberately buried. Sophia made slow progress on the glyphs. What she translated was tantalizing. References to kin, son, to dates in the Maya long count calendar, to what appeared to be names of nobles or priests. One glyph sequence seemed to reference chok, young man, and waib, lodging or shelter. The words remained frustratingly incomplete. "We need to open the chamber," Sophia said during one evening meeting in Miguel's farmhouse kitchen. "The answers are inside, not just on the walls." But opening the chamber meant risk. The seal had lasted this long for a reason. The ancient Maya understood preservation. The air inside was likely stable, nitrogen-rich, and untouched. Opening it meant exposing whatever lay inside to oxidation, decay, and contamination. They would need permits from the National Archaeology Authority. They would need resources beyond what the regional museum could provide. They would need time. That's when the second complication arrived. A man named Eduardo Vasquez, who appeared at the fence one afternoon with documents claiming mineral rights to the property. "I represent a private collector," he said smoothly to Miguel, his suit too fine for a rural farm visit. "My client is interested in acquiring certain items that might be found during your excavation. We can make this lucrative for you." Miguel looked at the man's manicured hands and expensive watch, and he understood immediately what was happening. Word of the discovery had attracted the wrong kind of attention. That evening, he called Dr. Morales and told her about the visitor. Her response was professional but urgent. "We need to accelerate our work, and Miguel, you need to be careful. Once these discoveries become public knowledge, they attract people who care only about profit." The true excavation was about to begin, not just of the buried chamber but of the complex web of interests, motivations, and conflicts that surrounded it. Chapter 3. The Entrance. The paperwork from Mexico City came through on a Wednesday afternoon in November. Federal permission to excavate the sealed chamber had been granted, contingent on full documentation and the presence of an official government inspector. Dr. Morales received the news with barely contained excitement. "We open it Saturday," she announced. "The full team will be here. We'll document every centimeter as we go." But Saturday arrived with complications. A representative from the National Institute of Anthropology and History appeared. Not the junior inspector they'd expected, but Dr. Carlos Mendoza, a man with significant authority and an expressionless face that revealed nothing about his intentions. His presence changed the atmosphere on the excavation immediately. This was no longer an academic exercise. This was a matter of national heritage. Mendoza watched as the team worked with archaeological precision, carefully removing the clay and stone that had sealed the chamber entrance for more than 1,000 years. Each piece was photographed, measured, and catalogued. It was meticulous work that proceeded in millimeters. By mid-afternoon, the entrance was fully exposed. The seal had been more sophisticated than initially apparent. A carefully constructed barrier of clay mixed with a substance that resembled a primitive mortar, reinforced with fitted stones. The ancients had meant for this chamber to remain closed. "The integrity is remarkable," Sophia whispered, running her fingers near but not touching the seal. "They did this 1,500 years ago and it's held perfectly." "Which means the interior is likely perfectly preserved," Dr. Morales replied. "If we're careful, we'll see that chamber almost exactly as the Maya left it." The final barrier was a stone block fitted into the entrance itself, held in place by the collapsed ceiling that had buried it. As they carefully removed this block, a change in air pressure was audible, a faint hiss that meant the chamber was releasing its long-held breath to the outside world for the first time in centuries. A team member positioned a camera on a flexible probe and inserted it through the gap. Everyone gathered around the monitor. The image that appeared was fragmentary, distorted by dust but unmistakable. The interior of a chamber, walls covered in geometric designs and more glyphs, objects arranged on what appeared to be a stone platform. "There are vessels," Sophia said urgently. "Look, ceramic vessels, definitely Maya craftsmanship. And that shape, that could be an offering plate." Dr. Mendoza remained silent, watching with an intensity that made everyone uncomfortable. Miguel, standing at the edge of the excavation, felt Roberto step up beside him. His son's expression had changed. The calculating real estate developer was momentarily replaced by something more genuine, wonder, or perhaps the same sense of standing at a threshold into history that Miguel felt. "It's real," Roberto whispered. "All of it. This isn't just old pottery, this is history," Miguel finished. "This is memory." The actual opening of the chamber would take another day of careful work. They would need specialized equipment, climate monitors, and photography rigs to document everything inside. But as the sun set over Puebla that evening, Miguel stood alone at the excavation site and stared at that dark, open entrance. For 1,400 years, whatever lay in that chamber had been preserved in darkness and silence. Tomorrow, it would face the light and the eyes of the modern world. Miguel wondered what voices they were about to release, what stories were waiting to be heard. As he walked back to his farmhouse, he didn't notice the vehicle parked on the road a quarter-kilometer away, or the man with binoculars who watched his progress with focused intensity, but he would learn about that watcher soon enough. If you're enjoying this adventure so far, tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Chapter 4. The Offering. The chamber's interior revealed itself gradually, like a photograph developing in a darkroom. As Dr. Morales' team carefully worked through the entrance, moving with the deliberation of surgeons, the details emerged in sequence. First came the ceramic vessels, at least a dozen, arranged on a low stone platform with deliberate care. They were polychrome, decorated with images of gods and glyphs whose meanings Sophia was still deciphering. Some contained remnants of what appeared to be copal resin, used in Maya rituals for incense, Others held objects, jade beads, fragments of bone carved into ritual implements, a mirror made from polished pyrite that still reflected light despite its age. The chamber itself was roughly 5 meters by 3 meters, its walls plastered and painted with murals that told a complex narrative. A procession of figures moved across one wall, each rendered in the distinctive profile that characterized Maya art. They wore elaborate headdresses and carried objects that Sophia identified as bundles, ritual packages associated with Maya ceremonies and mythology. But what captured everyone's attention was the central figure, painted on the far wall in layers of red, blue, and black pigment. It was a seated nobleman or priest, hands raised in a gesture that appeared to be one of offering or presentation. Above and around him, glyphs formed what looked like a caption or proclamation. "That's a date," Sophia said, her voice trembling slightly as she worked with the photographic documentation. "I'm seeing the Baktun, Katun, and Tun. If I'm reading this correctly, this marks 9-16-10-0-0 in the long count." "Doctor?" Morales pulled up the conversion on her laptop. "That's August 13th, 751 AD. Sophia, that's during the height of the Maya civilization, before the major collapses in the Yucatan," Sophia finished. "This chamber was sealed when their civilization was at its peak." Miguel observed this technical discussion with a sense of standing in the presence of something he could feel, but not fully comprehend. The objects in the chamber were museum pieces, certainly, but they were also echoes of real people, real hands that had placed these objects here with care and intention, real voices that had spoken words over these offerings, real beliefs about the gods and the cosmos that had driven someone to seal this chamber and hide it from time. Dr. Mendoza, the government inspector, took photographs of everything himself, occasionally making notes that revealed nothing about his thoughts. His presence had become a source of quiet tension. Dr. Morales had explained that federal oversight was standard, but Miguel sensed something else, a protective instinct perhaps, or something more guarded. It was on the third day of the chamber's excavation that the complications emerged in a more tangible form. Miguel was at his house when Carmen came to find him, her face urgent. "There are men at the gate," she said. "They say they need to speak with you about property rights." 2 men in business suits stood near the fence to the excavation site, flanked by 2 others whose bearing suggested they were employed for purposes beyond legal consultation. The lead man introduced himself as Licenciado Valdez from a firm in Mexico City. "Señor Hernandez, my clients have become aware of significant archaeological discoveries on your property. We represent investors interested in the commercial exploitation of these findings." "The site is under federal protection," Miguel replied firmly. "There is no commercial exploitation to be discussed. Nevertheless, certain objects that might be extracted could be of considerable value in the right markets," Valdez continued smoothly. "My clients are prepared to offer you a percentage of sales, which would be considerably more than any government compensation." "No," Miguel said. "Perhaps you should discuss this with your family," Valdez suggested. "These opportunities don't remain open indefinitely." After they left, Miguel found himself troubled in a way that physical labor had never troubled him. He called Dr. Morales immediately and told her about the visit. "This is why we move quickly," she said. "Once word spreads about significant artifacts, the looting networks activate. We need to catalog everything in that chamber within 2 weeks." That evening, Roberto came to the farm and began asking questions about inheritance, about whether Miguel had considered how the discovery might affect the property's future, about whether there were ways to legally facilitate access to certain pieces. Carmen watched this conversation with disappointment clear on her face. "Your son is scared," she said to Miguel later, "scared of missing out on something. That man Valdez planted seeds of doubt and possibility." Meanwhile, in the chamber, the final walls were being photographed and documented. The murals told a complex story, one that Sophia was beginning to piece together. The central figure appeared to be a young man. The glyphs suggested a noble son or possibly a priest in training. The ritual objects, the sealed chamber, the deliberate preservation all suggested this was a memorial, a chamber dedicated to someone significant who had died or disappeared. But the most intriguing discovery came on the fourth evening, when Dr. Morales called everyone to examine the stone platform more closely. Beneath the vessels and ritual objects, the platform itself bore carved glyphs, much deeper, much older than the paintings on the walls. These weren't mere decoration. They were a message, deliberately placed where they would only be found if someone opened the chamber. Sophia's translation was incomplete, but the meaning was becoming clear. This was a place of remembrance for someone who had vanished, someone whose fate was uncertain, someone the Maya had honored by sealing them, symbolically at least, into eternity. "We need to find if there's anything beneath the platform," Dr. Morales said. "We need to understand what lies directly below." But that exploration would have to wait until the next day. The light was fading, and as they secured the site for the evening, Miguel noticed something that made his blood cool. Fresh tire tracks in the dirt road and prints from multiple feet that had approached the excavation fence during the day. Someone had been watching them work. That night, unable to sleep, Miguel stood at his window and looked out at his land, his simple farm that had suddenly become something far more complicated than soil and crops. History, he was learning, carried a weight all its own. Chapter 5. The second chamber. The discovery came at dawn, which seemed to Miguel like a deliberate gift from history itself. As the excavation team arrived to begin their fifth day of work, Sophia noticed something that previous examinations had missed. The platform beneath the ceramic vessels wasn't solid. There was a hairline depression along one edge, almost imperceptible but present. "It's a lid," she said, her hands moving carefully to trace the outline. "The entire platform is a stone chest." The team worked with extreme precision to carefully lift the stone lid. Inside, the chamber had preserved something that shouldn't have survived 1,400 years. Textiles, woven cloth, now fragile but still recognizable as deliberate patterns, still bearing dyes that had held their colors through centuries. They wrapped something. What emerged, carefully unwrapped under the watchful eyes of Dr. Morales and Dr. Mendoza, was a bundle of bound documents, pages made from what appeared to be amate paper, the same bark paper the Maya had used for their codices. They were miraculously intact, protected by the sealed environment and the textiles that had been wrapped around them. Sophia's hands trembled as she worked to unfold the pages. Everyone else stood in absolute silence. Here was something beyond pottery or murals. Here were actual writings, actual words preserved directly from an ancient hand. The glyphs on the pages were dense and complex. But what struck Miguel immediately was the presence of what appeared to be genealogies, family relationships rendered in the careful notation system the Maya had developed. Names, dates, connections. This wasn't just art or offering goods. This was a record. This was history written deliberately and preserved with intention. "This is a royal genealogy," Sophia whispered. "I'm seeing titles, succession records. This appears to be the genealogy of a noble family, possibly the rulers of a smaller city-state that was subject to Pakal at Palenque. But there's more. There's narrative text. This isn't just a list. These are stories about the family, about their deeds." Dr. Morales was already documenting everything photographically, her hands steady despite the historical magnitude of what they were handling. But Dr. Mendoza had stepped back, his expression finally showing something: concern, or perhaps calculation. "Everything found here must be transported to Mexico City for federal preservation," he said. His tone suggested this wasn't a request. "This is beyond the capacity of any regional museum. This is national patrimony." Miguel understood the implication immediately. Once these documents left Puebla, once they went to the capital, they would become property of the state, subject to bureaucratic decisions and competing interests. The private collectors Valdez represented wouldn't be entirely shut out. They would have contacts in Mexico City, might find ways to access items or information for the right price. That afternoon, as the team carefully prepared the documents for transport in specialized containers, Roberto arrived with news that Carlos Mendoza had called him. "He wants to meet," Roberto said. "Not officially. He said there might be commercial opportunities related to the documentation and analysis of what's been found. He's suggesting that if we hire the right consultants, certain items or information could be made available." "He's offering to facilitate looting," Miguel said flatly. "He's offering opportunity," Roberto corrected. "Father, I'm trying to understand where you stand on this. Do we profit from this discovery, or do we let it all disappear into some federal archive where nobody from our family ever benefits?" Carmen watched this exchange from her seat in the kitchen, her disappointment visible. "What I stand on," Miguel said slowly, "is the fact that my grandfather worked this land, and his grandfather before him, and I've been fortunate enough to live on it. What I've discovered here isn't mine to profit from. It belongs to the people these mural painters were, to the family whose genealogy is written on these pages. Our job isn't to extract value from it. Our job is to understand it and preserve it." "That's a poor philosophy for a businessman," Roberto said. "Then I'm grateful I'm not a businessman," Miguel replied. That evening, Dr. Morales pulled Miguel aside. "The documents contain references to another location," she said quietly. "There are glyphs that suggest a white house or white structure somewhere on this land. I think they're indicating there's another chamber, another site." "How do you know this?" "Because Sofia spent 3 hours cross-referencing the glyphs with known Maya texts, and because she found a map, Miguel. Crude, but unmistakable. The genealogical documents include a map to another location. The same family that sealed this chamber sealed something else. Something they considered even more important." Miguel looked out over his farm in the gathering dusk. For 47 years he had known every meter of this soil, yet he realized he understood almost nothing about what lay beneath it. "We search for it tomorrow," he said. But as night fell, Miguel noticed something that confirmed his growing unease. A new vehicle parked on the road beyond his property. Occupants visible through binoculars scanning the excavation site. Watchers had become multiple. Time, which had been a gentle thing in his life, had suddenly become urgent. If this treasure hunt already has you hooked, hit the like button. It helps us bring more forgotten stories to light. Chapter 6. Beneath the Stone. The search began at first light with the map that Sofia had carefully translated. It wasn't precise. Maya maps used symbolic representations rather than geometric accuracy, but it was clear enough. From the sealed chamber where the documents had been found, a specific bearing and distance led toward a depression in the earth that Miguel had never noticed in 4 decades of working the land. Using the map's symbols as guides, the team marked out a rectangular area, roughly 200 meters from the original excavation site, on the western edge of Miguel's property, where the terrain dipped slightly and the soil remained perpetually damp from underground seepage. "The water indicates underground chambers," Dr. Morales explained. The Maya knew this. Water flow often reveals what's beneath the surface. They began excavating carefully, using ground-penetrating radar equipment that Dr. Mendoza had approved for transport to the site. The technology revealed something beneath the earth that made even the skeptical inspector pause. A void, a space, a structure. Digging through meters of accumulated soil, they reached what appeared to be the roof of a stone structure. Unlike the earlier chamber, this one bore no visible exterior walls. It had been deliberately buried, not sealed. The construction was older too, the stonework more primitive but no less intentional. As they carefully cleared the stone roof, an opening appeared. The interior was vast, not a small ritual chamber like the first one, but something larger. A warehouse, a storehouse. And inside, the reason the Maya had sealed it with such care became immediately apparent. Stacked in neat rows were ceramic vessels of a type Sofia had never seen before. Elegant, functional, bearing marks that suggested they were standardized, mass-produced for trade. There were tools made from obsidian, carefully wrapped in cloth. There were bundles of what appeared to be dried agricultural products, seeds, perhaps, or medicinal plants, preserved in clay containers sealed with resin. But most significantly, there were documents. entire bundles of amate papers wrapped in waterproofed cloth, stacked like inventory records. As Sophia began carefully opening them, her face grew progressively more astonished. "This is a trade record," she said. "These are ledgers. The Maya had actual accounting systems. These documents detail what was stored, when it arrived, where it came from, all tracked in glyphs. This is completely unprecedented. Nobody knew they kept records like this." Dr. Morales was photographing frantically. "This chamber is a commercial repository. This isn't religious or ceremonial. This is practical. This is business." But Miguel's attention had caught on something else. On the western wall of the chamber, there was a series of glyphs, and they were recent, not 1400 years old. Recent, as in within the last 50 years. "Dr. Morales," he said carefully, "look at this." The archaeologist moved closer, and her expression changed. The glyphs were crude by comparison to the ancient ones, but they were unmistakable. And they were dated, 1967. Miguel recognized the notation. "Someone else found this," Dr. Morales breathed. "Someone recent, and they—" She paused, understanding the implication. "They documented it but didn't report it." "Why would someone discover this and not report it?" Roberto asked, finally understanding that his earlier calculations about profit paled against the reality of history. "Because they were planning to exploit it, Doctor," Mendoza said quietly. His tone had changed entirely. "Because they were either going to sell what they found or hide it until they could arrange to do so privately." He pulled out his phone and made a call in rapid Spanish, speaking to someone in authority. What he said made clear that Dr. Mendoza's role was far more complex than simple federal oversight. He was investigating. He had suspected looting networks since before the excavation began. Over the next 3 days, the second chamber was fully excavated and documented. The scale of what had been preserved was staggering. These weren't rare religious artifacts. These were the mundane records of a functioning Maya economy, trade goods, accounting, inventory management. It completely rewrote academic understanding of Maya civilization's sophistication. But the practical reality of the discovery became complicated when the looting network that Valdez represented made their final move. They arrived at midnight with vehicles and men equipped with tools designed for rapid extraction and excavation. They planned to take what they wanted before the federal authorities could secure the site completely. What they didn't anticipate was that Dr. Mendoza had anticipated them. Federal police arrived simultaneously, blocking the road, surrounding the property. There was no violence. The looters understood they had been outmaneuvered and surrendered without resistance. But the violence of intention was clear. They would have stolen everything, centuries of history, turned into black market goods for wealthy collectors who cared nothing about context or meaning. As the police arrested the looters and their employer, Miguel sat alone in his farmhouse kitchen at 4 a.m. staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold. Roberto sat across from him, his expression completely transformed from the calculating businessman of 2 weeks prior to something more humbled. "I understand now," Roberto said quietly. "I understand what you meant about patrimony, about history not being ours to sell." Carmen placed her hand on Miguel's shoulder. "Your grandfather would be proud," she said. "His land held history all along, and you were its custodian." 3 weeks later, as Miguel attended the official presentation at the Puebla Archaeology Museum, he stood before displays of the ceramic vessels, the documented trade records, the genealogical papers, and the murals photographed and reproduced for public understanding. Dr. Morales stood beside him. "This discovery will change how we understand Maya civilization," she said. "We know now that they had sophisticated economic systems, professional documentation, organized trade networks. All of this was here, sealed beneath the earth, waiting for someone with the wisdom to preserve it rather than exploit it." Miguel looked at his weathered hands and thought of his grandfather's hands, and his grandfather's grandfather's hands, all working the same soil, all custodians of something they could never have fully understood. That was the true treasure, not gold or jade, but the knowledge that history had been preserved by honest work and preserved soil. As he walked through the museum, Miguel saw children looking at the exhibits with wonder. He thought of all the possibilities this knowledge would open for them, all the understanding of their heritage that would flow from these discoveries. That was worth more than any profit. And somewhere beneath his farm, the earth kept its remaining secrets, waiting for future archaeologists to uncover them in their time, each generation revealing another layer of what the Maya had been. Subscribe to our channel for more incredible tales of discovery and hidden history. See you in the next adventure.